Maze, I mean, we kind of were sitting here being like, we're talking about physicality all the time. That is the buzzword of the 2025 postseason. We were early in on it. And if only we could quantify such an ethereal thing, right? It feels like we hear all about it, and we have all these cameras in all of the arenas and player tracking data and Hawkeye technology. And I get a little text message from someone in the basketball illumination saying, "Hey, did you know Roland is back up?" And he sends me this link to 82games.com, which is like the first NBA analytics site. I mean, can you tell the audience, for those who are new to the game, right, how important 82games.com was?
So this was the original plus minus website. When I worked for the Suns and when I worked for the Knicks, I used this website for lineup data and for all the kind of advanced analytics that we take for granted now that is everywhere. It wasn't. There was one place to get it. It was Roland Beech at 82games.com. And then he eventually got hired by Mark Cuban and the Dallas Mavericks and joined their staff as director of analytics, and they won a championship. And Roland's work was instrumental in that. And 82 Games, even though the site was up, it was never updated. And so imagine my surprise when Tom says 82 Games is back and they're charting physicality. And I was trying to explain this. The best way I could explain it is like, imagine if you heard that, hey, George Lucas is back making Star Wars again. He's doing his own little Star Wars projects on the side. Like, wait, what? I've got to get into this. And so this is a great honor to have you on with us today, Roland.
Oh, no, it's a pleasure to be here. Yeah. So exciting to sort of be back. You guys have done a lot in the intervening years, so that's very cool. Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is something that I could not even in my wildest dreams expect that this would be the project that you come back into the NBA coverage with Physicality Ratings. Explain where the thought process began and the idea to do this, and then implementing it. This feels like it would take an army to pull off what you're doing.
Well, yeah, it goes way back. Back when I was actually part of coaching staff, I had this concept of the 5 coaching factors. So not the 4 factors, the 5 coaching factors, which for me were physicality, playing hard, playing with high IQ, shot making, and referee effects. And so this is one part of that whole spectrum. A lot of people say, well, aren't playing hard and physicality the same thing? And you could see it that way. The distinction I make is physicality is a player imposing some physical thing on another opposing player. So diving out of bounds to save a loose ball is playing hard, but not physicality. So, but yeah, the physicality timing couldn't be better. As you say, every single sort of post-game quote typically is about it. We've had crazy ones like Jalen saying in the Orlando series, well, we should just have a fight for it. Forget the basketball. Let's just fight. And the winner goes to the second round. So my timing is good. But yeah, I've had this framework for a while. It's sort of intricate. And as you say, it's very time consuming manually. Obviously the teams have this Hawkeye player tracking data, 29 joint positions, 50 times a second. You could essentially program some of what I'm doing up through that. But it is very nuanced, and we can talk about that as we go along. But yeah, I've had this sort of concept for a while, and just the timing was great. And I've lucked out. Covering Boston Knicks has been the series. Boston Detroit was good. Knicks Detroit was good too, but this one is even better, probably. Yeah.
So why is it even better? Because I'm looking at this and saying, we obviously had this big fall, which I don't think was a physicality fall. I'm wondering where the Jason Tatum injury falls, where this guy was having the best game in a long time, one of the best playoff games of his career, 42 points, 8 rebounds, 4 steals, a couple blocks, just filling up the box score, but also guarding Karl Anthony Towns, one of the biggest, burliest centers in the game, who's a stretch 5. And so he's doing a lot of more physical things, and it's hard to quantify that, but you're tracking physicality, not just falling onto the ground, but knockdowns. Can you walk us through what you're tracking with Boston and New York, and what are some of the takeaways?
Sure. Ironically, last year I did a project with some people. We tracked actually falls and knockdowns only for the entire 2024 playoffs. So you can find that sort of on 82 games. And that was interesting, but it doesn't get to the totality by any means of physicality. So now I'm tracking over 40 different forms of contact. So you have a push, you've got a bump, you got an elbow, you've got, clearing space for your jump shot. You push off the guy. There's all kinds of rebounding. So it's still evolving. I think eventually there'll be even more tags. I'm tracking all kinds of nuance. And generally, it's not hard to see, oh, yeah, that guy grabbed that guy, right? Dylan Brooks is grabbing Steph Curry. The question is really the degree and what level you want to care about. I just watched a regular season game because I want to compare a bit of that as well, of Phoenix-Houston. And that was an interesting game because Durant, right from the first minute, makes it clear he just hates having Dylan Brooks guarding him, right? Dylan will just put his hand on him, and just Durant acts offended. He still had a good game offensively, but it's interesting the effect physicality has. That's sort of how it is. I watch the games. You have to go through the play multiple times. There's often things happening on different sides of the court, right? And you can't see all at once. And grading the sort of level of force is the trickiest part, rather than just seeing, well, yeah, this guy, screens this guy, or this guy, drove into the other guy, or this guy tried to block at the rim, whatever sort of contact forms there are. So from that, I'm still learning, what do you do with all this data? But I think, I think it's the game changer, because we all know about shot making. Shot making has a huge effect on games, but physicality is underlying a lot of what's happening. So the series itself, this last game was where New York really stepped up the physicality. They clearly won the physicality battle by my numbers, whereas that wasn't the case in the other games. Boston, first two games was actually better physically, just, of course, missed a ton of shots. But this last game, New York turned the tables and a bunch of stats. I have what I call a Physicality Win, and they were like plus 38 physicality wins in the game. So pretty clear, one-sided take from my numbers on that one.
Yeah, I guess Physicality Win is where I want to start, Roland. Is how do you account for difference in magnitude, or is it simply just a head-to-head physicality interaction where one is the winner and one is the loser?
Yeah, it's not. Great question. There's not always a winner and a loser. You can have just sort of a minor effect, and this is it. When a guy touches it, that's like a level 0 touch, and then you have a level 1 touch, which is maybe it got you some sort of advantage. And then there's level 2 and up plays, which are strong physicality plays. But that's the toughest thing for me right now, is to assess the level. And so I'm still playing around with that. But absolutely, there's a lot of touching, which you think is, that's trivial, right? But I'll give you an example. So in Warriors-Houston, there was a play, Warriors have made a bucket. Houston's coming up the court, not on a break or anything, just trotting up the court. Van Vliet's coming at Payton. He doesn't have the ball. He's just coming up the court. And Payton's backpedaling just slowly, and then he stops and he pushes Van Vliet in the chest. And then he backpedals a bit more, and he does it again. He does it 3 times in about a few seconds. He just pushes him in the chest. And it's not a forceful push to where he's going to fall over or stumble, but it's enough that it's slightly stopping his momentum, right? And it's annoying, clearly, right? Now, on the possession itself, it probably has minimal effect unless Van Vliet's already sort of losing it a bit because of this treatment. But over time, these kind of things wear on you. This game I was telling you about with Durant and Brooks, Durant, by sort of late in the game, really didn't want to do anything. He was happy to just go sit in the corner and Booker could do all the work. And so that's what I don't know yet. I don't have enough data to say, do all these tiny little touches add up to something significant? So I'm trying to capture a lot of it. But it's crazy. Like on an inbounds play, fourth quarter, last 2 minutes, they're all grabbing each other, right? There's like, and you can't say, sometimes it's the offensive player is grabbing the other guy so he can push him off to get free, which is another thing I tag is, did he get free of a grab? So to your question, it's so much is still evolving. I don't have the data to really answer conclusively yet, but I am convinced this framework will allow me over time to get to really intense depths on, what physicality is effective, which players are more bothered by certain kinds of physicality. Just like with defense, you may not be good and bad at every aspect of defense. You may be good at certain physicality things and bad at other things. And, but it's fascinating. When you start watching it like I do, you just notice everything, right? Every little thing that even Adam does. You start saying, "Oh wow, this guy's a dirty player in a clean, dirty way, but he's really pushing it and so on." Yeah.
So this is great because as you're describing it, I was trying to think of like opposite ends of the magnitude spectrum. Right. And on the mild air quotes, because as you said, there might be an effect. I remember when I worked for the Suns, Bruce Bowen, when he would guard Steve Nash, as Nash was bringing up the ball up the floor, he would just karate chop his off arm over and over again. Yeah. Basically, because the refs wouldn't call it, and it wasn't a foul. It didn't stop Steve from going to where he wanted to go, but it was just annoying. And the downside was, for him, the risk was, they can only call one foul. I can hit him 7-8 times on that arm. They can only call one foul. So I'm making that physicality felt and known, even if it's not, like you said, making him stumble or lose the ball in that moment or not. The opposite end, I think about Karl Malone once turned and popped David Robinson in the head, knocked him out cold. He was unconscious on the floor, and I'll never forget this. The ref called the foul on David Robinson. So it's an and one, and it's like he's pointing to a corpse on the ground, like, foul on that guy, number 50 in black. And so through that, I wanted to ask, I'm assuming there is a differentiation between offensive physicality and defensive physicality in terms of the charting?
Oh, yeah. I chart both sides, rebounding, everything. And yeah, I mean, I'll answer your Bruce Brown thing. In this Phoenix Houston game, there's a play where Durant is driving and Brooks is guarding him by just slapping him. Alternate ends. I'm going to put the clip up because it's just the whole drive. He's just slapping him one hand and the other. He's not really playing defense. He's not trying to get the ball. It's incredible. And then I forgot this game was also the one where Plumlee and Adams got into it, and there's this vicious takedown. Right? It's like that's level 5 physicality where the 280-pound guy's slamming another guy to the ground. So yeah, again, it's the gray area still. Where are the kind of dividing lines on these force magnitudes? But they exist. Yeah, they're there, and I'm going to sort of clean that up. But yeah, as you say, it's we don't really know. Did all that Bruce Bowen stuff cause Nash to sort of be less effective, especially at the end of the games? I mean, what's so amazing about the Knicks series in a way is Brunson takes so much physicality on him. I track this as well, right? Physicality suffered. It's not just what you're putting on the other guy, it's what gets put on you. And Brunson is, the series leader for physicality suffered. And yet in the clutch, he's dynamite, right? He could still be playing at an elite level despite all he goes through, and they target him so much on defense and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, it's early days, but I'm very excited by this project because I think this is really the next big thing in basketball analytics, basically.
Yeah, it is groundbreaking. It is really cool. I'm reminded of Shane Battier, what he told me once about his long hair theory is that guys like Jalen Brunson, Luis Scola, Ginobili back in the day before,
100%. I know where you're going with this.
is the flailing. If you flop, your hair flies in the air, and it's a lot more obvious when you have a lot of hair that you get hit. And so Shane was always like, those guys, when they have long hair, they tend to get the call more often because their hair flies in the air, and it's more obvious than someone who's follicularly challenged, like some people. I'm looking at myself right here.
Yeah, Tom, is this just bald man agenda? What is going on?
It is bald man agenda.
To pirate this analytics.
Is that we get a bad whistle, okay? We get a bad whistle out there. And Jalen Brunson, by virtue of having his hair fly everywhere, are you wise to that, Roland? That there might be a hair bias involved in some of this charting. I'd imagine you're wise to this, and you're objectively tracking this, and not falling for the flopping hair.
I could believe it. It's an interesting theory. I mean, definitely it's dramatically, like you say, profound when the guy's hair is just everywhere. I mean, because actually, more serious stuff. I mean, yeah, what I'm looking for often is in the contact, does it somehow jostle the guy? Does his head snap? Is it, not all the flopping, hopefully, but do you see some sense the impact had any effect on him at all? But yeah, absolutely. I believe the drama of the hair could be real. I could probably assess that when I have more data. Yeah, does the hair follicles cause the cold more often? But it's shocking. I mean, to speak to refereeing, it's shocking to me how much is just being let go. I mean, 2 years ago it was sort of the opposite, right? A guy could drive and just any kind of contact he initiates get a foul. So I'm glad they cleaned up that. But now, do we really prefer to see Dylan Brooks mugging Steph Curry over Steph sort of showcasing his brilliance? And there was a play in Detroit, New York, that struck me because, the defender might have been Thompson or someone cuts inside the big, right? He's on the weak side. So he cuts inside the big and then it skip pass to the corner. He's got to get out to his guy. And he's running out to his guy and the big, it might have been Mitch Robinson, grabs his wrist, right? And you can see Thompson's like lunging and his hands behind him being grabbed by this guy and his arm, Mitch's arm is forward. And there's a ref right there and he doesn't call it. And that's a play that's a physicality win if you get away with it, right? Because now you're giving the guy the open three versus the contested three. And so in my tagging, I even have this note of it's a successful play because you didn't get called for it, basically, right? And so It's like it should have been a foul. So that's one of the little tagging notes I do have. But yeah, I'm astonished, because to me, the refs, they say, oh, you can't call everything. But, if you call consistently, the players will adapt and, the guy will foul out in 6 minutes like Danny Fortson used to do. And
Shout out to Danny Fortson.
It's fascinating, the kind of dilemma. But that's why, again, my fifth coaching factor is referee effects. You want to be sort of always optimizing to how the refs are calling the game, and you have to adjust a bit based on that. So,
Roland, do you think about it like steals in baseball, where it doesn't tell us enough to know how many stolen bags a guy has? We want to know how many times he attempted and got away with it. Similarly, with some of these, maybe level 3+ or whatever level of magnitude you want to call it on the physicality, are you tracking like who's the best at doing this and getting away with it?
I mean to get to that. Yeah, I don't have the sample size yet, but absolutely, That will be something you can do. I mean, you can see, okay, this guy, grabbed the guy 50 times and got called once, and this guy grabbed him 50 and got called 7 times, right? And we may see obvious biases in some of this stuff, right? The guys with reputations maybe get away with more, or maybe they don't. Maybe they get away with less. But no, this is where it's like, it's such early days for this project. But yeah, your questions are brilliant, right? Everyone wants to know that, right? Is there a way to understand how to get away with more, or, how to sort of highlight what they're doing? But it's interesting because, like, again, I don't want to harp on the same thing, but Durant and Brooks, Durant from the very early moments was talking to the refs, like, he's touching me, do something, he's touching me, and it went on the whole game. It's like, so yeah, managing the refs is a important part of the whole process. But yeah, once I get more data, all these sort of questions are very, attainable to sort of look at. Yes.
Well, let me ask you this in terms of, I mean, obviously the reason why we keep any of these metrics, right, is we're in search of what helps me win.
Yes.
And so even in the limited sample size that you have, is there a correlation between winning physicality and winning basketball games? And how strong of a correlation is there?
It's part of it. Obviously, shot making can trump a lot. So, game 1 and 2, Boston misses so many threes that all that physicality didn't win the game for them. But yeah, I think if you equalize the other factors in my coaching factors, you'll find physicality is immensely important. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the great players are showcasing it. A guy like Jalen Brunson has amazing physicality, and you wouldn't necessarily assume that. He's a small guy, but there's so many physical plays he makes in the game, and again, can absorb all the physicality put on him so much. So I think, yeah, eventually we'll see that, a big part of being a good NBA player is, handling the physicality. You have to, as a small guy, be able to handle it. You won't make, Jalen Suggs is insanely physical, right? A lot of these guys who are small, you have to be physical if you're going to make it in the NBA. And then likewise with the bigs, if you don't like sort of tangling in all the ways that bigs have to, physically tangle with each other, you're not going to make it, right? It's a very physical game right now in the NBA, and it's a key part of gaining these small edges. The Boston series is interesting because, Boston seemingly can generate pretty good look threes very effortlessly, right? They were often just putting, Jalen in a screen and Jalen's showing and things, and it's just instantly causes some mayhem. And it's like, it's so easy to get a three. It reminds me of, I watched some New Orleans games, and Zion has an amazing effect. When he's got the ball, the whole defense just sinks into the paint. It's like he can create a 3-point shot for his teammates with just one very simple pass. And yet, if they don't sink into the paint, he is such a dominant driver, right? So yeah, the game I saw, happened to be a game he got a triple-double and had a great game, but he was just overwhelming in his physicality on offense, right? It's just like you realize, wow.
So there's on your site, 82games.com. Again, I can't believe I'm reading this right now. It is great. The Knicks game 4 were clearly, this is from your site, were clearly the better physicality, in quotes, team in this one, with a Roland physicality rating almost 100 points higher, 55 more physicality, quote unquote, plays, and 38 in bold, 38 more physicality wins. In addition, they had a 35-25 edge in level 2 plus force physicality plays. And then you provide a table with all of these numbers in here. So, Amin was just asking, like, does this impact winning? And your early estimations and your early evidence, like, it impacts. It's in part. And the Celtics were beat in the physicality column by a whopping 100, almost 100 physicality rating points. And then also to last year, in the postseason, you tracked the postseason last year and found that in the NBA Finals, the Dallas Mavericks were trailing big time in terms of falls per game. Where actually, they fell a lot more per game against the Celtics in the NBA Finals, and like by a whopping margin. That the Dallas Mavericks, I think there was like 67 falls by the Celtics, and then over 100 by the Dallas Mavericks in that. And it brings me to my point of, like, a lot of times I'm seeing guys fall to the ground because they're trying to exaggerate and get the call when they're driving into the paint. But it also leads them vulnerable in transition on the other end, is that the other team is seeing, oh, he fell, I'm going to go create a 5-on-4 fast break. And it's so intuitive, but it's never tracked until now.
Yeah, well, that's why I started with that, because that's so objective, right? Does the guy fall or not? It's a lot more objective than, was that grab significant? What we found, though, is, style matters a lot in how you play. Boston falls not much because they spread the floor so much, and they're such a heavy three-point shooting team. So physicality for falls and knockdowns has a lot to do with your style of play. So a guy like, Jokic never really falls, but will knock down people, whereas a guy like Embiid is always falling and always knocking down people. So it was very interesting, and I enjoyed the numbers. And there's a lot of correlation to your full knockdown numbers and your overall physicality. But in terms of predictiveness to winning, it wasn't clear cut, and that's to do with what you say, right? Sometimes the fall is to sell a call. Sometimes it's after you've got the whistle, so you've actually won the play. But it can also be where you give up the 5-on-4, right? And so that's, we looked at it a lot of different ways, and it was, somewhat revealing, but wasn't compelling in terms of predicting who's winning the game very well. Whereas I think this much more robust physicality is. But yeah, there's so much out there. The falls are so objective. Like, there was one game, Tyrese Maxey fell like 17 times. The Philly-New York series last year was extremely physical. We tracked every game for falls last year. And that was extremely physical series. And people falling all over the place. But yeah, 17 falls in one game. But a lot of it's, he drives and initiates the contact and then falls, and he gets to call a certain number. But we even track things like, Luka turned out, for all his arguing, to get the best foul calling rate on his falls of any player in the playoffs last year. So it's like, for all his complaining, he was getting a lot of whistles. And then, you could look at, how often when a guy knocks someone down, does he get called for a foul and things like that. So there's fun numbers, which is why, we continue to track that. We're going to continue to keep falls and knockdowns in the sort of physicality package. But there's so many more physical plays happen in the game, hundreds and hundreds, versus, you might have 20 or 30 falls for each team in a physical game. So there's much more to it than just the falls and knockdowns. But that was a fun starting point for what's grown into this next stage. Yeah.
So one of the cool things you did this last year, was make a comparison between 1990s playoff basketball and modern playoff basketball to determine whether it was actually, quote unquote, more physical, or are we just having this weird nostalgia for something that never actually existed? What were some of the things that you found, Roland?
Well, it's amazing to watch old games. I mean, there's games where, we're on the 5 out. There's games where there's no one behind the 3-point line. Yeah. All 5 offensive players are crowded. I mean, it's crazy.
It's a different sport. It's crazy. It is wild to watch 90s basketball.
There was also, a game 7 or something where at one point it was an entire second unit. There wasn't a single starter at the game, right? It's like the whole notion of, okay, take the starters out, here come the bench guy. I mean, nowadays, no one does that. Right? You got to keep your key guys, at least some of them in there. So it was eye-opening how different the game was. I think the biggest difference is the space today means drives to the basket are so much more forceful, right? So much more speed and straight line drives. Back then they were weaving around, all these guys just clogging the paint. So we have so many more falls from drives, and those are often, high impact, high risk injury type of plays. Whereas a lot of the physicality back then was, jostling in the post and stuff. And, there's a lot of, force and pushing, but it's a bit more ground based. I think those are safer sort of impacts that we have today. I didn't do enough games to really get big sample sizes. The one guy who was clearly the most physical was Rodman, right? And Karl Malone, as you mentioned, was very physical. And, Jordan was sort of very mild by today's standards of physicality. But yeah, it was eye-opening just how different the game is. I mean, it's shocking to see literally no one behind the 3-point line. I mean, it's like crazy.
Roland,
right? Yeah.
Physicality aside, watching 90s playoff basketball is hilarious. I remember one time Zach Harper and I were doing radio during the summertime. And so it's like August. There's nothing to talk about. So we had on NBA TV, Knicks Pacers, the Reggie Miller, not the 25 points in the fourth quarter game.
Okay.
And do you know, there's a point where he has 16 in the fourth. 16 points in the fourth quarter. They're coming on the break, and I think it was Charles Smith, but he sees Reggie Miller open on the wing, leaves him open because he's worried about Antonio Davis coming up the court. I'm just like, look, I get it. The 3-point line wasn't what it was now, but guys, he has 16 in the quarter. This is supposed to be the apex of defensive basketball, where we're gonna leave the guy who's got 16 in the quarter wide open. And so there's all these little idiosyncrasies of, oh my, you watch it, what are you doing? What kind of decision making is this? And it just sometimes it feels like it's from another planet. It's not even the same sport.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had the same experience. I was like, some of the defense really isn't that good, right? We think it's this really fierce defense, and it looks kind of like pickup ball at times in the playoffs, like a game 7. It's like, so yeah, some of the impressions we have are false of how physical it was back then. On the other hand, they weren't afraid of clobbering a guy when he was going to the basket, right? The less flagrants made it more feasible for some really rough stuff now and then. But yeah, we should encourage people to go watch a 90s game, because it's quite a remarkable time warp to go look at that.
Yeah.
So you watched over 20 playoff games in the 90s, and your breakdown says that in the 2024 playoffs, there were 39 falls per game. And in the 90s, it was 35 and a half falls per game. So there was an average 3.8 more falls per game now versus then, again, in the sample size that you watched. But also what was interesting, like you point out, is that there's almost 2 times as many foul. I can't like reprogram my brain like when I see falls on drives in 2024 than in the 90s. So you're almost getting twice as many, 9.5 falls on drives in last year's playoffs compared to 5 per game in the 90s. But on the other end of that spectrum, there were a lot more falls on defending fast break paint catches back in the 90s than there were last year. And of course in post-ups because of quantity of, just a lot more post-ups than there are now. Is this a stylistic difference, or is this like it is more physical even if we hold constant the number of frequency of drives and post-ups?
I think it's a huge difference in how the game's played. Yeah, I don't think we can really compare almost, because if you're driving and there's 5 guys sitting in the paint ready to defend you, you can't just go right at them and try and dunk on them, right? Whereas now, often you beat one guy and it's wide open and some guy's coming over to try and meet you at the rim. And so you have so much speed and force generated as you approach the rim. It's just the games are so different. I mean, the space, we've talked about gravity and things in the NBA for a while. It is, the spacing is so different that the whole game has changed. And the fast break emphasis is different now. And I can't speak too much to the athleticism difference between players now and then. I'm sure we're a bit more athletic now, but it's just such a wildly different game that it's hard to compare yours in some ways.
So let me be the skeptic and say, what about flopping? How does flopping factor into all of this? Wouldn't there be more falls in this very flop-friendly era that we play in?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's it. You could say a lot of the falls on drives, the defender guarding the drive flopping. But there was flopping back then, too. No doubt. The post-ups is where you see the flopping. Obviously, Vlade famously, started that with Shaq, right? He's like, I can't guard the guy. I just got to flop, right? And so, that's flopping back then, too. But a lot of the guys who show up high on my full stuff from last playoffs are guys like, Kyle Lowry, who's definitely flopping all over the place. And, but it's crafty. I don't dismiss the craftiness of some of that. And the reality is, if you don't get the call, you're out of position, right? If you choose to flop on the ground and they don't give you the call, you're going to give up some advantage for the offense. So it's a risky play. Coaches often don't like it. Of course, if you get the call, then you get the praise. But I think flopping is something we need to obviously respect as part of what happens with falls. And again, that's why I've de-emphasized the falls a bit in this current system. We still track them, but they're a much lesser part of the physicality spectrum. When you have hundreds of other plays that don't involve falls. But there's still even flopping where you don't fall all the way to the ground, right? You sort of react and flail your arm to the hair, right? JJ Barea, when I was with the Mavs, perfected the mismatch in the post stagger. He would just stagger and he got the call a lot. He didn't have to fold to get the call. It's all part of the physicality bandwidth. And again, once I have more data, I could probably tease out a lot of that kind of stuff and tell you more.
And then we can figure out who the most frequent floppers are, and we can figure out who the most successall floppers are, right? Yeah, the ones who get away with it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And their hair length. You need to start tracking hair length.
We correlate it all. Yeah.
All right. So you have a chart here. Most physical players. You're looking last year, I believe, right? The sample size for this chart. 2024 NBA playoffs, falls and knockdowns. A clean, relatively objective physicality rating that can be constructed with falls and knockdowns per 36 minutes. Okay, here we go. Most physical, Daniel Gafford with 12.3 plays per 36 minutes. So that's falls and knockdowns. Yeah. Lou Dort, Joel Embiid, Devin Booker. That was interesting to me. And Kyle Lowry, we just mentioned him. And then the least physical, D'Angelo Russell, 1.8. Tobias Harris, Sam Howes, Rui Hachimura, and Cason Wallace. So this is really fascinating to me. Can you talk to me about Daniel Gafford, what you found out about him? I think people would understand Lou Dort, but and Devin Booker. So Daniel Gafford and Devin Booker are surprising to me.
Well, to V's point, Daniel's a bit of a flopper, right? He's always falling, going for the rebounds. He gets a little shove, he's going to fall. But, he plays with physicality. He's sort of moving his bigness around and hitting people and falling and knocking people over. So based on the falls knockdown rating, he was very high. And obviously the Mavs got to the finals, so that was a fairly decent sample size for him. Devin Booker is surprisingly physical. He gets a lot of physicality on him on offense. But no, he's actually surprisingly there for the physicality. I don't think he's a player who shies away from it, which is a great, characteristic to have in this era. So someone like Lou Dort, everyone knows, is very aggressive on defense. But yeah, I think some of those numbers are quite fun and intriguing. The Lakers side is funny. They had 3 starters in the bottom 10 on physicality by falls. And I think they still have the same problem this year, right? They got crushed by Minnesota in part because they don't have the physicality to match a physical team in Minnesota, right? Their physical team sort of up and down the line, Edwards and Gobert and Randall, and, Conley obviously not so physical these days. But I think, when you look at the front office side of things, this is an interesting sort of tool to look at as well. You want to have at least some balance of physicality on your team. Watching the playoffs last year, I hadn't realized, the Pacers had some physicality guys. You were the unsung heroes, right? So you learn a lot when you sort of watch games like this. But yeah, the Lakers, that was a fun one because, they were not physical last year. And I think, they don't have a good balance of physicality this year. So addressing that in the offseason will be sort of a key for them.
Roland, let me be the mad scientist here. Is there any way to get the optical tracking devices in the arenas to be able to detect some of these things, or is it too nuanced for the current technology to be able to figure out which ones? Because if we can get it to do that, now we've got the data, and it's all about processing after that.
Right. Well, this is it. If a team's smart enough to hire me, I absolutely think I can get that. I mean, the new Hawkeye system, 50 times a second, you get 29 joint positions. So you'll know if the guy's elbow hit the other guy's, head or something, right? I don't know what the actual 29 positions are, but you'll know when there's contact. And I mean, truthfully, with the optical tracking, you could even generate sort of force magnitudes from the movement, right? You'll know how hard he swung his elbow at the guy. So absolutely,
the Ron Artest to James Harden, where he just
boom. Yeah. No, I mean, so that's it. This is all a framework that I would plan to adapt to the player tracking system, and then you get it for every team in the league, every game. I still think, I'm an old school guy. I still think if you're with a team, you have to watch the games yourself because you can still pick up better nuance. And the funny thing in coaches' meetings, if you come in the next morning after a game, the coach will say, remember how that guy missed the tag in the third quarter or something. And if you rewatch the game, you'll remember it. But watching it live, it's so fast, you may not remember it. But if you watch the game again in sort of slow motion like we do as coaches, you're on the same wavelength, right? You can talk about the same plays and not have to remind everyone of the details maybe. But yeah, absolutely. The big picture is this is what teams should be doing. Maybe some teams are already sort of breaking ground with this. But this is the obvious use of the Hawkeye system, right? I mean, we don't need Hawkeye to get more granular really on, the pick and rolls necessarily. But it's the physicality is what the whole thing is doing. It's telling you when these guys are coming into contact and how much speed is happening when they do. So yes, absolutely. That would be the goal is you get this for everything, even real time or semi-real time activity on that level.
Well, I think you're hired to this show. I think we can say that you're the physicality general. Maze, me, we can workshop what kind of,
Yeah, I think we got to open up a whole new branch of the Illumin Army for Roland.
Yeah.
It's like special forces.
Yeah.
This is incredible. It's incredible. One last thing. Can you learn to be physical, do you think? Like, is this something that you can teach?
I think so to a degree. I think there is a certain level someone's got to be willing to take it, right? Because these guys have played a lot of basketball by the time they get to the NBA. And so if they shy away from physicality, this is often what, I won't name names, but certain bigs, right, get labeled as soft, right? And they often don't wind up in the league very long, even though they have the size and maybe some skills to, maybe they can shoot a bit, right? But if they can't handle the physicality, so it's tough. Yeah, I mean, I've always believed people can develop. Oklahoma City certainly develops their players amazingly well. I remember years ago, this is like 15 years ago, I was in a coaches meeting, and we were talking about, our players don't get many free throws or something. And I was like, well, let's design some drills to, get better at foul drawing. And one of the coaches said, you can't do that. They either have it or they don't. And that's patently false, right? We've seen all kinds of guys adapt their games, even copying other people. When, Jack had that sweep through move, the next thing everyone's doing it. So I do believe you can train people in physicality and teach them more effective ways of being physicality, right? Maybe someone's got what I would call losing physicality, right? You want to have winning physicality, the right physicality. You could be overly physical and I brought Danny Fortson. He gets called for fouls. He never adjusted his game. He was out of the league eventually because he refused to back down. But there's also all these crafty moves people are doing, the arm bars and everything. And it's like, so that, yeah, absolutely. I believe you can train a guy in physicality. But at the highest level, where it's the most intense, that's toughness, right? That's underlying toughness. And, some people have more of it than others. I do think you can improve it. But yeah, whether you can equalize it, I don't know about that.
That's great. Well, thanks so much for sharing your physicality degree with us. This is great.
Oh, pleasure to be here. Nice to see you guys. Yeah, I remember we used to hang out at the Sloan conference and thing. I haven't seen that for a while, but yeah, maybe one day I'll get back to that. So yeah.
Yes, sir.
Congratulations to your promotion to the Illumin Army General, the Physicality General. Congratulations, Roland.
Thank you so much.